All right, welcome all you Trek Live crew members to episode 93 of Trek Live. Apologize for the technical issues. We're running a little bit late this morning. If you're listening to this after the fact, disregard everything. That's what happens when you run a live show. You just got to roll with the punches when you have stuff like this. With that being said, I'm really excited to jump in to talk some Star Trek. Bill, how you doing this morning?
Doing really well. Excited to talk about this topic. I think it's timely, given the time of year we're in. It's summer blockbusters in Star Trek. We're obviously in the heat of the summer, so yeah, looking forward to it. I like topics like this because you can talk about anything, and we can cover all the shows. We could just as easily be talking about TOS as we could be talking about Discovery. And I like those topics. I like bouncing around and covering everything because I love everything. So, yeah.
Yeah, it should be a fun stream for sure. Do you have anything? Have you watched any Star Trek? Anything on your rewatch?
I have. I watched. Was it 3? I guess 3 since the last time we went live, or maybe 4. I watched Angel 1. I think after our live stream last week. So I watched that last weekend, Sunday night. I watched 11001001.
Yes.
Say that 5 times fast. Love that episode. I said on Twitter that I think, at least right now, if somebody asked me like what's the most underrated, underappreciated, doesn't get enough love episode of Star Trek ever, and I'd probably say that one.
That one.
Yeah, I think it kind of gets. I don't know. I can kind of go both ways on this. I feel like it gets discounted because it's TNG season 1, which people tend to overlook and kind of look past and just try to burn through to get to the good stuff. And I think, like I said on Twitter as well, maybe the fact that it's surrounded by Angel 1, which is silly and goofy and, has a reputation for not being good, and Too Short a Season, which is like the most vanilla, blah,
middle of the road
not
episode
very good.
ever.
Yeah, mediocre. Yeah, so it's kind of bracketed by these, not successful episodes.
Right.
So maybe, watching it chronologically the way that I do, it really stands out. Maybe more than it deserves, but I don't know. I love it every time I get to it. As I get older, I like it more. I've always been a fan of like the Bynars are in it. I don't know if you remember from your experience with TNG season 1 a little ways back, but Bynars are these like technologically connected pairs of aliens who need computer help, and they need something to dump all this information on their home world onto. So they steal the Enterprise out of space dock. Picard and Riker are left on the ship, and my favorite thing about the episode is it's maybe my favorite treatment of the holodeck ever. Voyager kind of toys with the same territory later on with romance on the holodeck and sort of falling in love with the holodeck character and how that's going to work, and what the ramifications of that are. Voyager does it with Fairhaven and Alter Ego, but this is the first kind of dabbing their toe into that territory with Minuet and Riker, and I love all those scenes, especially early in TNG season 1. It feels refreshing to have scenes where there are two characters just kind of sitting there talking to each other and doing character development. TNG season 1 tends to be very plot driven and big science fiction stuff happening, and not necessarily a lot of like time to breathe with characters for extended periods of time. So it's a breath of fresh air for me. I love that episode a lot.
Yeah, so do I. I feel like it could almost be a Star Trek blockbuster episode, possibly.
It could be,
which we could get into a little bit later, but
perhaps.
Yeah, I believe I've watched 2 episodes since we talked. It's I watched The Naked Time, and then The Enemy Within. Yeah, so that's kind of the update on my rewatch. Kind
early
of
TOS.
Early TOS. It's hard to kind of step away from. Even if it's a bad TOS episode, I still love it because I'm in TOS and I'm watching TOS. It's hard to look at it with a critical eye just because I just forget how much I love TOS. So it's been good. I'm not really. I don't feel like I'm. It's hard to watch an episode. I'm loving it, so I'm excited to keep going through TOS season 1.
That's cool. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear both sides of that. I mean, certainly there are people who, like you, kind of embrace TOS for what it is, as like a throwback, and just kind of like let themselves soak in it, and it doesn't bother them. And we know people on that interact with us on this show, like Rob, who's here often and has been on our show, who has a hard time with TOS.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of struggles through it a little bit because it is so different from the rest of Trek, I guess, from a pacing standpoint and the style of the production. But I love that you love it because, like me and Rob, you're of a certain age. You're not certainly there are a lot of people out there who grew up with TOS who love TOS and can always go back to it. And that certainly wouldn't necessarily apply to you. Like, that's not a show of your childhood or anything like that. I don't think. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool that you're able to dive right into it like that.
Mm. Yep. So I guess without further ado, I think we should jump into the topic. First, a little backstory. The term blockbuster, I think, came from Jaws, hence the thumbnail of the stream. 1975, people would line up around the block to see Jaws. So I guess from kind of now on, that those big summer movies have been dubbed blockbusters. So just a little backstory to that term.
Sure.
Bill, what was the first thing that came to mind when you thought of blockbuster non-Trek?
First thing that comes to mind for me, my first summer of like loving movies. I saw Gladiator in 2000 with my dad. That was kind of a summer movie. I saw it in May, but I won't count that. That's different. I remember there were two that are really memorable for me. Like seeing it that summer, it was The Patriot with Mel Gibson.
Nice.
And The Perfect Storm with George Clooney. I don't necessarily like love either one of those movies. I have fond memories of The Patriot especially. But those were two, like, they felt like big events. I was conscious of them like coming out. I was aware of like the marketing for them, and I was anticipating them. And that's kind of part of the definition for, like, in my mind, like, what's a summer blockbuster? It's these big event tentpole movies that it feels like an event to go see them. It doesn't feel like it's something that you can see and you can come out of the theater and like go to work, go to school, whatever you're doing. And
hey guys, this is Trek Live Dan here. I'm editing this after the fact, just letting you guys know that there's some technical difficulties, so I'm kind of cutting that out. So that was here, but I cut that out so you guys have some good quality audio and video. Thanks for understanding. Perks of being live, if that's a perk. That's not a perk. Bye.
For me, the first two that come to mind are The Patriot and The Perfect Storm, because they were the two big summer movies that I was excited. In Gladiator in May, before the summer really kicked off. I was still in school, and that was kind of like the kickoff of my movie loving life, I guess, which I've talked about before, I'm sure. But The Patriot and The Perfect Storm are two movies that I remember getting the Entertainment Weekly like summer movie preview, and they were the two that stood out to me, and I was like aware of before they came out. I was excited about the marketing. The trailers were everywhere, and TV commercials were on all the time. And that's part of what makes me think of a summer blockbuster, or that's part of what I think about when I think of a summer blockbuster. It's the marketing. It's the fact that lots of people are talking about it ahead of time. People are excited to go see it. You can be pretty confident that when you go to see it and you come out of the theater and you go back to school or you go back to work or whatever you're doing, you're going to run into people who also saw it, and you can talk about it. Yeah. So they were the first two that I think of, even though I'm sure there are other summer blockbusters that I saw before I lived and breathed movies in that year. That go back further than that. But yeah, my movie life kind of started in 2000, so that's kind of like ground zero for me.
Okay. Yeah, for me,
what
like,
about you?
for me, when I first thought of it, it was probably Transformers or Avatar. Those big kind of summer movies that kind of everyone was talking about. The tough thing for me was my theater doesn't really get first runs because where I live and kind of the nature of the theater. So it was like, instead of like middle of the summer, it was more like end of the summer, fall, because then we never really got first runs. So I never really got to experience that. So those are the two movies kind of that kind of came to mind. Another movie that I love that I kind of consider a summer blockbuster is Independence Day. I think that it kind of checks all my boxes, and we can talk about that too. That I have to have checked to have it considered as a summer blockbuster type of movie. So, let's see here.
Cool.
Yeah, I just lost your video, but I mean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here.
There we go.
Back. Okay.
Yeah. For an episode or a movie to be considered a blockbuster for me, is it's got to be actiony. It's got to have big visual effects. It's got to have like a small, really light, borderline like corny and cheesy love story. Also utilizing the whole cast and getting kind of everyone involved. So that's going to go into my picks for today. Bill, what kind of boxes do you have to have checked to be it to be considered a blockbuster?
You've got a lot. I didn't put all of those things into mine. Most of mine are action heavy. Feel kind of like I said with the definition, the way I define blockbusters, have that like event feel, bigger than the usual episode. Maybe higher stakes than some other stories that we get. Big stakes, lots of action, are probably the two that I would link all of these episodes with.
Right.
Most. There's some variety here, I think, but they're the two that I think best define the episodes as a group that I'm going to talk about.
Cool. So yeah, I think we should just get into it. What's your first episode that you like to talk about? We didn't really decide on how many we were talking about, so I just.
I mean, let's just kind of roll with it and see how many we come up with. Cool. I mean, I have a group of 10, but I don't necessarily expect to name all 10, and I'm sure that there's probably going to be some crossfire here.
Okay.
So
yeah,
some of them can be honorable mentions. I may throw them out at the end, but
right.
I'll talk about the ones that I definitely thought of the fastest for sure. But the first one that came to mind for me. Voyager. I feel like that is like the quintessential big summer blockbuster Star Trek episode for my money, because of the things I just kind of laid out as the two things that I was looking to check off. High action value. There's a lot of big stuff happening with this. The ship's falling apart. The crew is getting separated and picked off. People are. It feels like big things are happening, and that event feel too because of those big things happening. Tuvok is blinded, and like I said, the ship's falling apart around them. It just feels bigger than the average episode of Star Trek on a production scale and with visual effects that they're pulling off.
Mm-hmm.
So reset button aside, which doesn't bother me as much as it bothers others.
Yeah.
Year of Hell is my kind of quintessential. If I want that blockbuster fix, that's the episode that I'll go to.
Yeah, I agree. I love that episode. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I love that episode. That it wasn't on my list, but I know you would probably pick it, and a lot of people on Twitter definitely. We saw some Year of Hell love on Twitter.
for sure.
Yeah, it definitely checks all my boxes now that I think about it. Especially with, I mean, it might be better than like a light cheesy love story, but it might go deeper than that. But yeah, I think you're totally right on the money with that pick for sure.
Are you thinking of the Janeway Chakotay watch?
Yes.
Stuff? Yeah, that's honestly, when I think of Year of Hell, that comes to mind about as fast as anything. That little motif that kind of goes through the episode is some of my favorites. What's the first thing that came to mind for you?
The first thing that came to mind for me was actually Search for Spock. And this is my kind of first kind of episode. I think there's a lot of good action. I think they utilize the cast pretty well. I love, Shatner stealing the Enterprise. It feels really actiony, and I don't know. That's the first thing that came to mind. Weirdly enough, for my list. But yeah, Search for Spock is on my list too. And I wanted to pick it because I feel like it didn't get a lot of love, but it doesn't get a lot of love, so I wanted to throw it out there as one of my picks. One of the first things I thought of for sure.
And you'd be right. I mean, it was a summer blockbuster in 1984.
Yep.
But I'm pretty sure it was a summer release, so it was a summer blockbuster, and it is. It does have that DNA. It feels like a summer blockbuster. It feels like an event movie with a lot of big things happening and a lot of action. It's a game changer for the series and the movie franchise, with having the crew kind of not formally resign their commissions, but like they're at the end of the movie, they're not in uniform. They're off doing their own thing. So they're like laying down the gauntlet and changing the dynamic and doing big things. So absolutely, Star Trek 3 to me is definitely it feels like a blockbuster, and it is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Definitely a good pick.
Yeah. What's the next episode you'd like to highlight, or movie, or whichever?
Another thing that came to mind very fast for me, it always does whenever I think of like blockbuster events, kind of quintessential Star Trek, is the Doomsday Machine from the original series. A lot of, especially for the original series, it stands out as being a little different because of how action heavy it is, and how it leans into like space battles. And the original Star Trek series is obviously a show that had a lot of budget constraints. It's a 1960s TV show. There were a lot of production restraints and things that they wanted to do but couldn't do, with things like space battles and a lot of action heavy stuff. Star Trek the original series certainly has a lot of action with fisticuffs and hand-to-hand combat and things like that. That's where you get most of your action in the original series, which is kind of the opposite of what we get maybe in later Star Trek. Most, Voyager, Enterprise, Deep Space Nine, I don't necessarily think of a lot of like hand-to-hand fighting in those shows. I think of a lot more space battle kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And in TOS, the one time you really kind of get that. There are others too on lesser scales, but the Doomsday Machine is a lot of that. So it stands out in my mind for that reason, as a unique, different kind of TOS episode that lines up as a summer blockbuster for me. Big things happening. Another ship that's the equal of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Seeing a ship like that, as crippled as it is, and as damaged as it is, and compromised as it is, gives the episode a lot of weight dramatically. I think if you know the Constellation could be beat up like that, the Enterprise could be beat up like that. So it raises the stakes, and it makes it feel like we're in a tight spot here. Like it's a dangerous situation. Seeing a contemporary of Kirk, even a superior officer to Kirk, the Commodore Decker, be as like emotionally, beaten as he is by this situation. I think that's a lot of weight too. So, because of all the dramatic weight and the action, and like I said, making it feel like an event because it stands apart from most of the original series, it's one that came to mind quickly for me.
Yeah, it's on my list too. It wasn't like the first couple that I thought of, but the more I started to think about it, the more I realized that it really had everything. It had like this big dramatic storyline, bunch of action, like you said, both space battles, and like physical fighting. I think that it just makes for a perfect
summer blockbuster episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't hurt that it's one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever.
Yeah.
It'd be very, very, very high on my list. Like 10 favorites across the board, easily. So it's an easy one to throw in. It's another one that, if I want like that, I don't do a lot of, you know me well enough to know that I don't do a lot of like pick a random episode and watch it. I usually watch it chronologically, but if I want to pick a random episode to just get a fix, it's Doomsday Machine's an easy one to go to.
Yeah, and the more I look at my list, I'm like, man, these are like top 25 Star Trek episodes. So I'm thinking that maybe my favorite episodes or my the best episodes maybe ever they correlate with this list. So maybe that'll be something to look at in the future. The next episode that kind of came to mind right when I thought of this was Best of Both Worlds. I think it's kind of the easy answer, but it's really true. It's got everything. It checks all my boxes. It utilizes the cast really well. It feels big. It has like big stakes. So yeah, I couldn't leave it off my list. So I had to say it. So
yeah, I mean, Best of Both Worlds is kind of a no-brainer. It has to be named on any topic like this because it is everything that we've kind of talked about. It checks all the boxes. It has everything that you would look for in a big summer event movie. Mm-hmm. It's got big time action. It's a game changer. It's got high stakes, the highest of stakes, really. And it's a great episode on all levels. I mean, we've covered it. We've talked about it for sure. We have, I think, a whole episode on Trek Live about the Best of Both Worlds and how great it is. It's a no-brainer pick that
what else
we would be remiss. Yeah, there's not much to say other than it's great, and it does it all. It takes advantage of the Borg when the Borg were at their best and most mysterious. We certainly get a lot of the Borg over the course of Star Trek, and some more successfully than others. But this is certainly them at their most powerful and most scary, and it's one of those. Another thing that I guess I could kind of tack on to my list of things that I'm looking for are. And this certainly fits with Best of Both Worlds, and I think all the episodes that we've already picked is like if the episode can honestly pull off giving you the feeling of I don't know how they're going to get out of this, like making it feel like they're really in an uphill battle here. It's a challenge. It's a big time. They're going to have to really succeed at something big to break through the challenge of the episode.
Yeah,
that's. Sometimes all episodes certainly try to do that.
Yeah.
But some more successfully than others, and certain episodes certainly have that in spades. And the Best of Both Worlds, I think, is maybe the best example of that. With the cliffhanger, just being like, I don't know how they're gonna do this. How are they gonna succeed? So, yeah, it's a great pick. It's an obvious no-brainer, like I said, and. Maybe the best pick of this topic, I think.
What's next for you?
I'm going to go to Enterprise, which I love so much.
Yes.
It's my single Enterprise pick, so I didn't load up here with Enterprise love. But for me, it's Twilight. It's season 3. It's the what if worst case scenario. It lays down the gauntlet for what happens if Archer and crew fail to stop the Xindi, if the Xindi launch their weapon and they actually manage to, be not stopped. Earth will get destroyed, and they're not going to just stop at Earth. They're going to hunt down every last human, and they're going to exterminate the species because that's their mission. And we get to see that play out, and it's scary, and it feels. It's similar to Year of Hell in that it leans on the reset button, which bothers a lot of people. But like Year of Hell, I think it reveals a lot successfully about the characters. And like I said, I think it especially in the case of Twilight and the third season's in the arc, it lays down the stakes. It tells you, this is what's going to happen if they don't succeed.
Right.
This is one possible outcome. And I think that serves to provide a lot of dramatic weight to the rest of the season. But in a vacuum, if you can tolerate the reset button and you can get by the fact that none of these things actually happen, in a vacuum in that 1 hour, I think it's very successful. It has some of the things you even talked about. It's got some hints of romance with not the romance that people largely think of with Enterprise, Trip and T'Pol. It's Archer and T'Pol.
Yeah.
It's a different future. It's a different path that this crew takes, and I love that they don't spell it out. I love that there's a really cool editing choice in that episode. When towards the beginning, T'Pol is kind of explaining to Archer, what's going on with his memory, and T'Pol's his caretaker, and Archer asks her like, just how far has our relationship evolved, and T'Pol just kind of looks at him and they cut. They don't show you the answer, but I love that. I love the mystery of that and leaving it vague.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly implies that maybe some things have happened, and maybe T'Pol has some feelings that have evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I love everything about that episode. It's one of my favorite Enterprise episodes, and it feels bigger than the average Enterprise episode. It feels bigger than the average Star Trek episode in the same ways that Year of Hell does for me.
Yeah. I think that's a great pick. I love that episode as well, and I think you're right. It does feel like bigger than the average Enterprise and Star Trek episode. So I think it's a great pick.
Great.
I will continue the Enterprise love. I feel like this is like the no-brainer list. I'm going with Broken Bow. I think it checks all my boxes. It's got action. It's got big visual effects, Emmy-winning visual effects, I believe.
Yes. I believe so too.
It utilizes the whole cast. It feels really big, obviously, that being a season premiere or a series premiere. So it does feel really big, bigger than the average episode.
Sure.
And I figured how much I love this episode, and I think I wanted to give it some love. It's a no-brainer pick, but I feel like it has to be mentioned because when I think of episodes that would make a good summer blockbuster release, Broken Bow for me is one of those episodes. So
yeah, we I think we did an episode a few months back about cinematic Star Trek, episodic Star Trek that feels like a movie. And this is a little bit of a different spin on that. We're specifically going for like summer blockbuster here, but I hope we brought up Broken Bow in that cinematic, because I really do think Broken Bow is the most cinematic, maybe episodic Star Trek ever felt. It just because it's introducing things, it's new, it's fresh. It's not just introducing new characters; it's introducing like a whole new look of Star Trek. Up until TNG, DS9, Voyager all kind of have a very similar visual language because they take place pretty much contemporaneously. They're all happening, kind of in a run. It's whatever it is, 14 years of history, kind of back to back through those three shows, and because of that, like the sets, the production design, all kind of has a similar look and feel. Where Enterprise is kind of redefining everything because they're going back and it's going to a different time. So all of those things contribute to making that episode, I think, feel specifically cinematic, and it is very summer blockbuster in its language, in its tone. There are a lot of big things happening. It's got time travel. It's got humanity's first steps into exploring space and conflict with the Vulcans. Like there's just a lot happening in that 2 hours that does feel very cinematic and very event, summer blockbuster event. It feels like a tentpole for the franchise because it was changing everything and starting a new chapter. So I love the pick. It's not on my list. It was a late cut. I was hoping you would mention it. Because this list would be incomplete without it.
Right.
So I think it's a great pick.
Yep. It is. What's your next pick?
I'm gonna go back to Voyager, and
Awesome.
this is not not necessarily like a lot of the episodes we're choosing here are big events in themselves. This is more of an abstract one, I guess, because I don't even remember how you feel about this episode, but it feels bigger than it is. Maybe it's Macrocosm from the third season. It's the crew has been infected with a macrovirus, and these weird insect sounding viruses are floating around the ship, and the only one who's really around to stop it is Janeway. And it's sort of there's another episode on this list. Actually, it's not on my list, but it's on a lot of lists on Twitter.
Okay.
I saw Starship Mine.
Yeah.
From TNG, which is like Die Hard in space. It might be on your list, maybe. I don't know. This is sort of Voyager's version of that. It's Janeway knowing her ship inside and out, and on her own with a phaser rifle in hand, and sweating and in a tank top, and kicking Royal. But and I've always felt I've kind of been up and down on this episode. There are things about it that I don't love. It's not one of my favorites by any means, but it always does feel very much like an event because it is different. It feels more action heavy than some others, and it feels more embracing of that action heavy thing. You know, it's just completely buying into we're doing action adventure this week, and it's not really interested in much else. Mm-hmm. So for that, I think it belongs on this list.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick. I think that summer blockbusters can have that kind of feel of, it's not good, but it is like a big event, you know. Sure. It's like you said, it is Die Hard in space, Voyager's version of it. I think it's a great pick. It's not something that I thought of right away, but it definitely fits the mold that we've been talking about. So I think it's a great pick.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't think of it early on in this. It was a late add to the list, but the more I thought about it, even when I was a kid and the episode was coming on, I remember seeing the preview for this episode like the week before it aired and thinking it felt like it was going to be big. And I remember it was after First Contact, and it was First Contact introduced the new like phaser rifles that you would see kind of from that point on. And I remember thinking it was really cool that Janeway had that phaser rifle that was like a really cool prop, and cooler than the old school TNG like regular phaser on the end of a plastic rifle. You know? It was a different looking prop, and seeing Janeway in distress, sweaty,
dirty,
obviously
greasy,
like in a dirty,
sweaty,
grimy,
bloody,
with that thing at her disposal it felt like it was going to be a big deal, and in some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't, but it's an episode that I've always kind of looked at like, man, this. Even though I've come around again on it, I think I loved it as a kid. I got cold on it over the years, and now I'm kind of warming to it again.
Okay. I'll keep on the Enterprise love and Voyager love. My next pick is Equinox.
Awesome.
To me, this was kind of a big moment, not just a big feel of as a big episode, but a big moment in the show and in the storyline of the show. I mean, this is they meet another Starfleet ship, and I love that there's like, you know, some action, you know, some space battles, great visual effects, not so much a love story, but I think that it just feels big. It feels big. It feels like it could be a summer blockbuster. You know, two captains going head to head. One's kind of like a loose cannon, and one's kind of the quintessential, you know, staple of Starfleet going against each other. I think it has that blockbuster feel to me. So I had to have Equinox on my list.
Sure, I think it's a great pick, and I do think it feels big and feels like a blockbuster. It certainly felt that way at the time when it came on. It felt big. And I love Equinox for all the reasons you just laid out. The two captains going head to head. It's very TOS actually. You know, in TOS you get a lot of like in the Doomsday Machine, what we just talked about. You know, another high-ranking Starfleet official, whether it's a commodore or an admiral or a captain, who's kind of flown off the rails a little bit. And not necessarily quite as often in TNG and DS9, but you get a little bit of it in Voyager in the form of Equinox. where you get these two like Titan Starfleet captains who have very different outlooks and responded to the same situation in a completely different way.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and embraced different ideologies to survive. You know, Janeway bought into the Federation and the Starfleet ideals and leaned on them as her kind of backbone to make it through to where she is at that point, where Ransom on the Equinox felt like he had to kind of toss them by the wayside and didn't feel like they were going to work in his circumstance. But in his defense, he's in a different situation. He's on a smaller ship with less resources than Voyager even had. He's got his reasons for doing what he did, and you know, you can debate whether or not they were right or wrong. But I think because it raises these big questions about, you know, the Starfleet way of life and those values, and you know how Star Trek kind of preaches at us that these are the things that we should live by, and these are the sort of keys to getting to where Star Trek is in the future, because it's raising these kinds of questions. It's like an existential thing, you know, that it really gets to the heart of what Star Trek is. So it does feel like an event for all that.
Yep.
For all those reasons.
Yes.
Great pick.
Do you have any more that you like to mention?
I'll throw a TNG one out there. One that it's another, maybe it says something about me. I picked 3 episodes that all have a reset button at the end.
Sorry, what episode was it? You kind of broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I picked Cause and Effect.
Oh, yes. Okay.
From The Next Generation.
Yeah.
It's yet another reset button, like I said. It's because of the reset button. Maybe that's the common theme here with these 3 episodes that are all part of my list. The reset button does allow them to go to bigger places and do things like blow the ship up over and over again. But it's another one that it feels different. It has a different trick to it than our typical episode of Star Trek. The time loop is a different. Felt like a new thing at the time, and it still kind of does. And it's another one that it's the stakes feel big. It's another one that I think you can. I certainly, when I'm watching it, if it's fresh and you know I don't feel like I can, which sometimes is a problem for me because I've seen it so many times, I feel like I can like name the dialogue off. I don't know how they're going to get out of it. Like if you approach it from a fresh mindset, it really does feel like, man, how are they going to beat this? Like what are they going to do? How are they going to get out of this problem? The Cause and Effect, I think, is like a classic example of that kind of that attempt working. Like they successfully convey that this is a big challenge for them to overcome, and the solution's innovative and different and cool, and I just love Cause and Effect. It's a fan favorite, I think, but it has that. I think maybe seeing the ship blow up over and over and over again makes it feel like a summer blockbuster to me. There's explosions and big action happening, and sometimes TNG doesn't. It certainly did with Best of Both Worlds and a few other examples, but TNG can certainly have stretches of episodes that lean heavily into dialogue and not action, which, depending on your taste of Trek and what you want out of your Star Trek, could be a good thing or a bad thing. But it stands out in my mind as a uniquely action-packed episode of The Next Generation. Right.
Yeah, there must be a correlation between how many times the ship blows up to how good an episode is as far as blockbuster goes. But yeah, I think this is a great pick. I think it does feel really big, like you said. I mean, it's got big stakes. They're gonna either blow up or live. So
sure,
it does feel big, and it feels big because it really stumps the crew. It's at the last 10 minutes they kind of figure out what they're gonna do. So I think it's a great pick.
I love that it feels like it always feels like the structure of it just works. Like the part of the challenge for them, the crew in the episode, is that they don't have a lot of time. Like they keep running into this. They quickly run into this anomaly that kicks off this event that resets them, and you feel like if they just had a little bit more time, they might be able to solve it.
Yeah.
But they keep running out of time. So the clock is another kind of factor with this one. You just feel the tension of time, pulling at them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites, and it feels like a blockbuster to me because it feels like an event because it's different and the stakes are big and stakes are high. So definitely one of my favorites.
The last one that I'll mention, I feel like to kind of, drop the mic on my list, because I feel like this is maybe a little bit controversial. It's Star Trek Into Darkness.
Oh man.
Yes. So, I feel like it is actiony. Sometimes there is some, insert action sequence here in the movie because I feel like that's just a summer blockbuster, trait that it has to have. Has big visual effects, obviously, Kelvin timeline, great visual effects. And the whole cast does get involved. And I'm not so critical on Into Darkness as other people are. I have troubles with kind of the back end of the movie, but I think to me it feels big. Coming off the success of 2009, I think it was. I thought it was good, but like I said, problems with the back end kind of bring it down for me. But it feels big, like a big blockbuster, so that's why it's on my list. So
yeah, in a lot of ways, I think it might be the biggest, the most embracing of the blockbuster moniker of any of the Star Trek movies. 2009 certainly, doesn't shy away, and Beyond either. And all the Star Trek movies try to tap into it on some level, but Into Darkness is unapologetically a summer blockbuster.
Yeah.
It's embracing all of the traits of what a typical summer blockbuster is.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of action. It tries to be groundbreaking in it tries to do big things with the characters. There's yet another reset button, sort of.
A little bit
with the Kirk death scene that they undo very quickly. But they try to do a big thing there and give it a lot of emotional weight. So yeah, I mean, Into Darkness is certainly a controversial one, and I almost don't want to love to do an episode. I don't think we've ever really tackled Into Darkness specifically on our show, but it is such a hot topic even now. 6 years later, where if you bring it up on Twitter, duck. It's going to be
look out.
It will touch a nerve. For me. So it's a topic I'd love to revisit more specifically, but it's certainly a summer blockbuster in every way. I think all three of the Kelvin Timeline movies really embrace that.
Yes.
Which bothers some people and not so much others. If you ask me, it's what Star Trek needed at the time. But it's undeniably a summer blockbuster, and I, like you, am not a critic of the movie.
Yes.
I would say that it's, to me, actually, I think it's the best looking piece of Star Trek ever. I think I may have said that on the show before, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But just the visual style of that movie, the way the colors pop, the way the sets are lit, I think it's just gorgeous. If you have the means to watch it on a 4K TV with a 4K Blu-ray,
yep.
You won't. I think you'll at the very least appreciate the look of the movie. So I would definitely recommend that. That certainly plays into that blockbuster feeling too. It just feels big because it is. I mean, that's one kind of like Star Trek 3. It is a blockbuster.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yep.
So definitely an interesting pick, a good pick, if you ask me. Maybe not if you ask some other people. But I'll agree with you because I like Into Darkness.
Yep. Any final picks that you want to throw out there? Mention.
A couple that I certainly wrote down that I think are just as worthy. But are common easy picks are Yesterday's Enterprise and Balance of Terror, TNG and
Mm-hmm.
TOS. I think they have all the traits. They're big. They're events. They're very action heavy. Balance of Terror is kind of the other example. I talked about the Doomsday Machine kind of being unique in that it embraces like space battle, and Balance of Terror is certainly more minimal than
Yeah.
the Doomsday Machine. It's more that the two ships are kind of stalking each other and not in an out and out combat most of the time, which I think plays to its advantage. I love that about it. It's tense and not so much. I mean, it's a submarine movie in space, which
Right.
There have been summer blockbusters. I remember. I don't think it was in the summer, but from that same year that I talked about at the very beginning of the show, I remember. I don't know if you've ever seen it. U-571. It's a submarine movie with Matthew McConaughey and Bill Paxton. I think I remember seeing it in the theater right around the same time I saw Gladiator, and it was
Hunt for Red October. There's
that
been
kind of movie,
there's been a
absolutely.
bunch. Yeah.
Yep, Crimson Tide. There's
Yeah.
there's a handful of them that are definitely summer blockbuster type movies that take place on a submarine. And Balance of Terror, I think, lines up nicely with that.
Yep. Agreed.
Yep, a couple of Deep Space Nine episodes that I did write down that I didn't necessarily pick. They're both from season 4. Starship Down is an episode. The Defiant gets pinned down in the surface of within the surface of a gas giant. They're getting stalked by Jem'Hadar ships. The crew is all kind of broken up in different sections of the ship, and they're trying to get fight their way out of it. And Sisko's badly injured, and it feels big. It's sort of like Macrocosm in the sense that it's not a season finale. It's not a 2-parter. It's not a big event episode in all the common in all the common ways. But it feels bigger than your average episode.
Right.
As a one-off. And then To the Death is another one involving the Jem'Hadar. Episode starts, the Defiant's coming back from a routine mission. They show up at the station, and the upper half of one of the pylons is blown off, and these renegade Jem'Hadars have attacked the station and really done a lot of damage, and they're going to look for Iconian technology, and they're not even they've broken off from the Dominion. They're going to go try to do damage themselves, and Sisko and crew end up linking up with more traditional Jem'Hadar to go hunt them down, and it's like a very much a summer action movie in space on Star Trek TV. It's very much embracing of the kind of pulpy, one-off, quick hit action. We don't necessarily get a lot of, so it's another one that kind of stands out as a quick hit action story. Yep. So, yeah. What about you? Any others that you didn't name, but you
no.
come to mind in the course of the conversation?
Really, in the course of the conversation, I kind of forgot about Timeless, which I'm ashamed.
Sure.
But that feels like a big kind of event. Kind of the whole cast is kind of involved in that. Really big stakes. Again, one of those episodes that you talked about. You don't know how the crew is gonna get out of this. This is a tough situation. So, Timeless came to mind while we were talking about all these great episodes. So,
yeah. Last thing I'll throw out there is one last one is our most recent entry, which is the season 2 finale of Discovery, Such Sweet Sorrow. I think has some summer blockbuster qualities on its own. Very action heavy, very cinematic.
Big visual effects.
Yeah, the
whole crew is utilized.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's game changing. It's high stakes. It's got it all. I think it covers, as we were kind of talking about the qualifiers, what makes a summer blockbuster episode of Star Trek. It's kind of realizing that the most recent episode of Star Trek is one that fits in that criteria. So, yeah,
which is crazy to say, but
yeah.
All right. I guess moving on to Trek Live Spotlight. Do you have any Star Trek content that you'd like to mention? I've got one that I'm looking forward to, and it kind of jumped up to the top of my list. It's an episode of Earl Grey, where they talk about the serialization of TNG. I love discussions about is a show serialized or not, and I feel like TNG kind of gets thrown by the wayside a lot because I feel like we kind of focus on Voyager, TOS and some other shows. But it's nice to kind of see TNG kind of maybe put under the microscope a little bit for that. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that. So
I will have to listen to that. I have not listened to it yet. It's in my queue.
Yeah.
But that sounds really good.
Yeah.
I kind of shouted them out last week, but there's an episode of Making It So, which is the interview show with people who work behind the scenes on Star Trek. They interviewed Morgan Jandel, who wrote The Inner Light and Starship Mine, which is an episode we mentioned earlier, Die Hard in Space with Picard, and a couple episodes of Deep Space Nine too, Armageddon Game.
So a heavyweight Star Trek writer.
Yes. Yeah, somebody who's written one of the all-time classics.
Yep.
And some other really good ones too. So I definitely would recommend checking them out. That's a good first episode to kind of give a tasting, get a tasting. And then another one that I always forget about this show, but every time I listen to it, I love it. It's called Snap Trek, and it's Ross and her name escapes me, and I'll get it. But it is. They picked 2 random episodes of Star Trek. I don't even know that they're really random, but they picked 2 episodes that sort of have some connective tissue, and they compare them.
Okay.
And it's a really cool, unique concept. The most recent one is Parturition from Voyager and Hatchery from Enterprise, which are 2 really awful. Like, it's just a unique topic. It's two episodes
very
that
unique topic.
Don't get a lot of talk, and very middle of the road episodes, but. It's a really fun conversation. I'm just looking at their episodes here, and they have everything from Extreme Measures, which is a late Deep Space Nine episode, and Lethe, Starship Mine, and Macrocosm, which I have not listened to, but after talking today, I really want to.
Yeah. Yep.
The Gamesters of Triskelion, a TOS episode, and Sunkatsi, Cause and Effect, and Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which makes perfect sense.
Yes.
Arena and Darmok. Big Goodbye and Our Man Bashir, really, really good stuff. That's a great show that does not get. Jen is the name of the co-host, Jen and Ross. Great show that deserves maybe more love than they already get.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. All right. We will be back next week. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. I said we'll be back next week, hopefully with less technical issues. We could actually have a live show and get people involved in the conversation. Yeah. We're hoping to have another Trek After Dark next week. Hopefully. So that should be fun as well. Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Looking forward to hopefully getting back live if the subspace interference stays away.
Yeah.
If we can avoid that, we'll be back live next week and hopefully get people involved. But this is a cool topic. I hope people check us out on the podcast feed or on YouTube as a recording if possible. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.